Carl lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of Indiana. He was 72 years old, his hair nearly all white, his steps slow and measured. Most of his days were spent sitting by the window, looking out at the garden. The house was once filled with laughter and the smell of freshly baked pies when his wife, Ellie, was still alive. They had been together for over 40 years, sharing everything, even the smallest things. One of their favorite rituals was listening to the radio together every evening. Not to catch up on news or listen to popular music, but simply to enjoy those old, familiar sounds, late-night storytelling shows, or sometimes just the comforting static between stations. That radio, dark wood with silver trim, the paint chipped away, sat by their bedside like a loyal old friend. After Ellie passed away, Carl stopped listening to the radio. He couldn't bring himself to turn it on. Every sound from it reminded him of what was missing. Eventually, he placed it in a cabinet, covered it with a cloth, as if burying a part of his memory. Though the years went by, he never threw it away. Deep down, some part of him still believed. Some things, even in silence, never truly leave. It was a quiet autumn night. Dry leaves rustled on the porch, and a chilly breeze slipped through the old wooden window frame. Carl couldn't sleep. He was used to the silence, but that night, something kept him awake. The clock read 3:07 a.m. He sat up, intending to get a glass of water, when suddenly a strange sound echoed from the bedroom. At first, he thought it was the wind, but then he froze. It wasn't the wind, it was the sound of the radio. The old radio, covered in dust and tucked away in a cabinet for the past 10 years, was on. Its small display glowed faintly, and from the speaker came a familiar voice. "Carl, I know you're still awake." He went numb. It was Ellie's voice. Not something similar, not a trick of the mind. It was her voice, warm, gentle, soft, just like every night long ago. "Don't worry, I'm only stopping by for a moment," the voice continued. "You still have it, don't you? Our old radio." Carl felt his heart tighten. There was no background music, no static, just Ellie's voice, as if she were sitting on the other end of the radio waves, separated only by the thinnest veil between worlds. After exactly 1 minute, everything went silent. The radio turned off. The light disappeared. Carl rushed to the cabinet. There it was, the radio, lying there, completely off, as if it had never been touched. He sat in silence for hours, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But inside, he wasn't afraid. On the contrary, he felt at peace, as if Ellie had come back just to say, "You're not alone." The next morning, Carl woke up with the feeling of having just fallen out of a dream, but everything had been too vivid to be mere imagination. He walked straight to the radio in the cabinet. It was still there, covered in a thin layer of dust. The dial was still set to off, the power cord unplugged. There was no sign that it had ever been turned on during the night. Carl sighed, but he didn't feel unsettled. On the contrary, a wave of warmth swept over him, memories rushing back, the nights he and Ellie would sit together listening to their favorite radio programs, the soft laughter, their hands intertwined under the dim glow of the lamp. The radio wasn't just a device. It was a bridge to moments that could never be replaced. A few days later, Carl did something he had avoided for 10 years. He turned the radio back on, not to fix it, but to listen, even if only to the quiet hum of static waves. He turned the tuning knob, passing through layers of white noise, snippets of old, faded songs, until for the briefest moment, he heard a soft laugh. So familiar it made his chest ache. Just a second, then gone. Carl didn't tell anyone about it, not because he feared being called delusional, but because he felt no need to explain. Sometimes the sounds lost between the frequencies don't come from this world, but they find their way through, right when someone needs to be reminded that love, when truly deep, never really leaves. A week passed since that strange night, and Carl began to notice that he had changed. Not in the way people usually describe after a major event, but in a quiet, subtle way, as if he were now living in two layers of time, the present and the past, coexisting on the same invisible frequency. Carl started spending more time in the living room, where the old radio sat. He didn't turn it on, didn't try to recreate anything. He simply sat there, his hand resting on the worn wooden casing, as if he could still feel the faint heartbeat of a time long gone. In the silence of the room, he felt Ellie's presence, not as a ghost, but like a soft breeze brushing his shoulder, a gentle, familiar feeling without a name. One afternoon, as the sunset poured through the window, Carl came to realize something he had avoided for a long time. Some things don't need to be explained. Ellie hadn't returned in the literal sense. But the love she left behind had never truly disappeared. It lived on, in memories, in the voice that came through the radio one random night, and in his own heart, where it remained as alive as the first time they locked eyes. Carl smiled. Not because he understood what had happened, but because he knew he was no longer alone. And sometimes that's enough. Carl no longer waited for the radio to play that strange sound again. He didn't try to decipher what had happened that night either. Instead, he let it all remain, like an unexpected gift from the past, needing no explanation. The radio now sat quietly on the shelf, no longer functional, but Carl didn't put it away. It had become a part of the room, like the old photographs, like the knitted shawl Ellie had once left draped over the armchair. Every time he passed by it, he felt a quiet peace, not a deep sorrow anymore, but a warm feeling, as if that love still lingered here, in the air, in the morning light, and in the rhythm of his every breath. Perhaps we all have a frequency of our own to connect with those who have passed, not through technology, but through the heart. And if we listen long enough, deeply enough, we may come to realize sometimes love doesn't disappear. It simply shifts into another way of being. Carl was no longer afraid of silence, because within that silence he had found Ellie, not in form, but in memory. And sometimes that is all it takes to keep on living.